Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, show about hot takes hotter than hot, tasty pancakes, bringing you the pod extra jokey. We're talking about the season finale, entire season of Loki. I'm your host, Christian, and we're on YouTube for a special YouTube video, as well as our main podcast feed, talking about the Disney Plus show Loki. But I wouldn't be doing it alone. You wouldn't want to watch this, just me blabbering on. No, I'm joined by my two favorite tricksters.
Chris Conkling.
And Brian Dupree.
Boys, happy to have you and happy to be talking about this show with you. We are talking about the entire season of Loki, now streaming on Disney Plus. For the video format, I'm going to skip doing the trailer and all that, just because it's a lot of work, and I'm really tired. I'm lazy. We're recording this late. But I'm excited to dive in. What are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to do a non-spoiler overall thoughts. That'll be a brief summation of our opinions on the entire show. So if you haven't seen the show, you're safe for now. We're going to talk about that and probably compare it to the previous MCU TV efforts. And then we'll jump into spoilers. Don't worry, there will be a clear warning and indication when we go into spoilers. And we're going to jump into it. So let's start with talking about our non-spoiler opinions on Loki. Brian, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. I have had a great time with all of these shows, and no different with Loki. This has been really exciting. I think it does, we talk about it, but it does the classic Marvel thing of doing a great balance between comedy and serious/emotional moments. We spoke about Black Widow recently. I think this show has some really heartwarming and touching moments for Loki and for other characters that maybe we haven't gotten in this exact way in terms of the relationships that we get to see Loki experience. So I think it's really good for that reason, but it also really, in an interesting way, opens up the future of the MCU in a way that the other shows have not done, and has really dropped some big concepts on us. And for the people who like to speculate about where the movies are going, this show will allow all of your wildest dreams to become theoretically possible, I think, which is just a whole lot of fun. It just, as a fan of the MCU and seeing where these stories could possibly go. I think the acting performances, Tom Hiddleston has been playing this character for 10 years, and he still brings fresh perspective. Obviously, this is not the exact same Loki that we know from the timelines that we've seen, but even still, he's close enough, and we get to see him become introspective in a way that we really haven't gotten in a deep way that we do in this show, getting Loki to think about himself and to realize his place in the larger context of the universe and the potential multiverse. Aside from Hiddleston himself, the addition of Owen Wilson as Mobius, Gugu and Mbatha-Raw as Renslayer, and Sophia Martino as Sylvie, there are really great characters in this. And to the TV show's credit, I think we get to have a lot of characters fleshed out in a pretty decent way throughout the course of this thing, which isn't always something that you get in some of the MCU movies. I think we'll talk about it a little bit later. But overall, I think this has a lot of the pros and cons of the other shows, but I'm still on board for these shows ultimately, even if I think there's a question of if this is the best delivery method, as we were talking about off mic, for this content, and right, if it's the most effective way to do it. But in terms of as a fan, I've consistently had fun, and this is probably one of the most consistent of the shows so far.
Completely agree. Yeah, I agree with Brian in that. Like he said, I had a ton of fun watching this show. Loki is my wife's favorite character in the MCU, so it was a blast waking up every Wednesday morning and watching the new episode. I think this is the show that she's probably, or has been, most engaged with, and we've watched everything. But that's always a lot of fun watching that together. In terms of performance, Brian talked about it a little bit. I love the character dynamics between Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson, and Tom Hiddleston and Sophia Martino. They both have great chemistry. There are some characters like Gugu and Mbatha-Raw who I thought maybe didn't get developed as well as they could, but I definitely think they will have more character development moving forward, especially now that we know that, the show's been greenlit for a season 2, which is great. If there was any show to greenlight for a season 2, this is 100% the one to do that with. Even better though than the performances in the show, I really appreciated that this was the first MCU show that brought up existential ideas like determinism and self-actualization. And I think Loki's the perfect character to do that with, considering, what we learn about him in the show and what we kind of know about him from at least the earlier MCU going up to, Avengers in 2012. Like, that's the Loki that the show focuses on. And I think that's a great version of Loki to base a show on, considering where he is emotionally and mentally right after losing to the Avengers in New York. So I just thought that was a really fantastic way to introduce those concepts and ask the questions about free will and, are we kind of trapped on this path, or do we have agency in our own lives? And we'll get into that a little bit more later on in the show. But yeah, what this show has added to the MCU in a comic book sense, like Brian mentioned, this is going to be a big moment for the MCU, and we'll talk about what that means more in spoilers. But yeah, I had a lot of fun watching the show. Brian's absolutely right in saying that this is the most consistent of all the MCU shows. Each episode was enthralling. I know not everybody feels that way. I personally really enjoyed WandaVision. So I'm not quite sure if I like this more than WandaVision. I definitely like it more than Falcon and the Winter Soldier. WandaVision had a very human, emotional themes in those shows as well. Trauma's a big deal and resonates with a lot of people. So I don't know if it surpasses that show for me, but at least in terms of the number of episodes and the quality of each episodes, it's definitely more consistent than WandaVision was. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with it.
This is one of my favorite MCU things. I said that at the beginning of the series on our weekly upload shows, which you can find by subscribing to the Pop-O-Holics podcast, get our audio feed, as well as our weekly news on YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. But I had said that this was one of my favorite shows in the MCU and one of my favorite things in the MCU, and I stand by that. I do think that some of the episodes in the middle aren't as strong, but I never, ever got detached from this series. I was completely invested the entire way through. This is the first real, true A to B character study of one of these characters in the MCU, and I think it fully fleshes out everything that we've known about the character of Loki, about what it means to be that character. We get the idea of several different versions of the same person strewn throughout the show as it deals with multiple timelines and stuff. That's not much of a spoiler to say that there's multiple versions of things happening that are occurring as Loki is what they call a variant himself. Mm-hmm. And I found the writing in the show just completely some of the best exchanges and what I'm here for supernatural and what the superhero can bring. This reminded me of a lot of the great things that we saw from the Wachowskis' Matrix series as far as just great philosophical dives. I don't think it ever hits kind of some of these cinematic highs that we've had in the past. I do think that it's able to be compared to those things, which is excellent. And I just don't think the MCU's had any of that, anything like that. There's some stuff here or there, but to have a show that seems so dedicated to it is really awesome. And to have a finale with no spoilers, the finale doesn't have third act problems, and it still does all the great things comic book films do, right? Comic book films should leave you wanting the next issue. And certainly this TV show does that in spades, as we're going to talk about. It makes you go, what the heck is next in store for everything? But at the end of the day, it doesn't devolve. It chooses not to devolve in a stupid, mindless, bonkers CG fest what ruined WandaVision, what I think ruins Black Widow. Maybe ruins a strong term, but I think diminishes what these characters are. Even the action is true in developing characters in this series, and certainly, man, it ends with such a banger. All the performances are great.
I do.
Go ahead.
I want to let you finish your thought, but while you're talking about this, I do want to bring up the fact that I think WandaVision had a challenge that this show didn't have, which is it was a limited series. And we're going to talk more about the delivery methods later on in the episode. But the benefit that this show has over WandaVision and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier is that this show gets a season 2.
I disagree.
So they don't necessarily need to completely wrap up every thread or what they believe to be every important thread in the season finale. They only needed to complete certain story threads because they had more room and knew that they will have more room to continue the story for another, 6 to 10 episodes. So I do think that benefits this show over WandaVision, because I 100% agree with you that I think both WandaVision and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier have that Marvel third act problem in their season finales, and this show doesn't. But that's because there's more to come. So that's my personal opinion on it.
I have to hard disagree. If I didn't know there was a season 2, it wouldn't matter. Because and I'll probably go into detail more in spoilers, but I think the character beats that we have for the majority of characters. Now there's one in particular that in the context of the show, I think is undeveloped and does get the benefit of going, well, we are promised a second season. But even where Loki ends, some people might say that it's not, but I think it's very fitting. If I didn't know there was a season 2, I'd have very little complaints because we know we're getting more Marvel, and this has bigger implications outside of even just this story. It has implications for the entire universe. So, I have to disagree. I don't think that having stupid, dumb action at the end of your series is necessary if it's the end of a limited series. I just think the structure of this show is consistent, whereas WandaVision is a little inconsistent. It has a whole
I don't think it's fair to say stupid, dumb action, though. I definitely don't think that's fair, because they're still comic book movies and shows, and
but
part of comic
to
books.
His point, there's no power battle. What do we call them?
Right. A power struggle.
Beams
the
of
power
level.
beam power struggle.
Beam
right.
power levels.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course,
yeah, I get that point. But
of course,
I don't think it's fair to say dumb action. And I'm not one of the people that requires that of my superhero content. I'm really sticking up for those right now that want that out of their superhero content, because I know there are a lot of people that did not like this finale because there wasn't like a huge action scene, and I can respect that. I disagree that all Marvel content needs that at the end, but I don't think it's fair to call it stupid.
See, I don't want to get into.
Go ahead.
I don't want to get into spoilers, but I think in the end of episode 5, we get kind of a big climactic action scene, and the last episode is kind of a exposition heavy. Where do we go from here?
They did the reverse.
Laden,
they did the
right?
reverse of what WandaVision and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier did, which was give us exposition heavy episode, penultimate episode, and then action oriented climax.
Right.
This show flipped it, in which we got action oriented penultimate episode, exposition heavy climax. And I think I guess it depends on personal taste, because I mean, we've talked about in the past when we reviewed both of those other shows, I said the same thing, that I think it would be smarter for Marvel to just forfeit an episode and merge those final 2 episodes so they seemed a little more balanced, because getting all the necessary exposition for the show in the penultimate episode and then having the final episode just be pure boom booms and pow pows, it does feel unbalanced. So I see where Christian's coming from. I don't think it's fair to call it stupid. That's my.
I'm so sorry for calling it stupid. Where I want to come across with the boom boom pow pows is like, what doesn't have third act problems? What's the best third act? What are some of the best third acts in the MCUs?
Endgame.
Endgame.
That's probably the strongest.
Very
the
boom,
strongest
boom,
third
pow,
act.
Pow. Avengers. Yes. Very boom boom pow pow.
Yes.
And why is that different? Like, it's not because there is action in this, and the reason I think it works better, even though it's not huge, is because the characters matter. And in Endgame and in Avengers and in the Marvel films that are at the top tier, the action scenes are telling us more about the characters. They're highlighting their cool skill set, right? They're giving us those nerdy moments. But at the end of the day, it's well thought out and within its means. And I don't think it's just about, did you end it with an action scene or not? That's not really my thing. My thing is like,
was it earned?
Yeah, not even just an earned thing, but like even just does it does it move the story forward, or is it just okay? And this is my problem with Black Widow. Do we stop the story to have a fight scene, and then now we're on to the next scene? Because it should always be in service of character, no matter what you're doing. And that's when the MCU is working at its strongest. I think it does it here.
I agree.
So
Don't worry, Christian. We're doing a controlled landing.
Controlled crash.
It's a good reference. I would be remiss if I did not point out this has great direction. Kate Herron, as the director for all 6 episodes, has a very singular vision. I love it too because I talked about on one of our weekly uploads from a while ago the game Control, and this has a very similar aesthetic. It has this very bureaucratic office-like aesthetic throughout, and that to me is working so well. I love when that's implemented. It is gorgeous. There's so much symmetry in all the shots. It honestly felt like an art house film in some points with the set design. I mean, just the shout out to the set designers and art direction. It's like so good, and conceptually all this stuff is working for me. And it kind of doesn't make a lot sense if you think too much about it, because it has to do with time travel and all this other stuff. And there's a lot of plot holes you can fill in with what's happening, and maybe it'll get explained. But it doesn't matter because it just works, and it works thematically. And I love all that. There are, I think the middle part of this series is where we get away from some of the aesthetic stuff that I love, and we get more into Marvel territory. But I still think because you got Tom Hiddleston at your disposal, you've got Sophia Martino, Owen Wilson delivering a really, I would say the MCU equivalent of what we get between in True Detective. He's kind of like hey man, who am I thinking of?
Matthew McConaughey.
He's not the Matthew McConaughey character. He's the other guy.
Or Woody Harrelson.
He's a Woody Harrelson character. He's the MCU version of that, so we're not getting near those levels, but he's fulfilling that role really well, and it's great to see him showing up for this. And I think everybody's really, really strong. I'm sorry. This is great stuff. I love this almost top to bottom completely.
I agree.
This is what I'm here for.
Incredible. Owen Wilson exasperated whispers. I don't know how to describe them, but you know it when you hear it.
I don't know what you're saying. Yeah, it's the most
Put it on a
It's
t-shirt.
pretty good.
You could put it on a t-shirt. Here I am, just being Owen Wilson. It's so great. I'm here for it. It's my favorite Disney Plus show. It's gonna be hard to beat it. Oh, and then we'll get into it. The last person that we see, it's like.
Yeah, we can't talk about that yet.
So good.
Very good, though.
Before we get into spoilers, does anybody have any final thoughts? No, you guys are I'm just ready.
No, I think we covered all of our non-spoiler thoughts on the show.
Watch this show.
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
curious too. I'm always talking about this kind of stuff. But if for some reason you're a fan of the show and you don't watch Marvel stuff, which is weird, but it's fine. I'm glad to have you. I do need to have you watch this show and tell me if it's good. This is where we are in such bonkers territory for these things that I'm I don't know if anybody can get anything out of this if they're not. But if you're the person that's not invested in Marvel stuff, I need you to watch this and tell me if it's good TV, because I just don't know. I do think
we can't possibly have an unbidased perspective at this point. We're too deep.
Right.
We're too deep.
I to that point, Christian, I mentioned this a little while ago when we got news of what the title for the new Doctor Strange movie is. And that is, when are we going to cross the threshold where general audiences just don't want to follow along anymore?
Is this a reference?
No,
Crossing
it's not. I mean, it could be punny. I didn't mean for it to be a reference, Brian. But at what point are we going to cross the threshold where it gets too science fiction fantasy and too comic booky for general audiences to be interested still? I feel like we are kind of reaching that point. But like you, I'm super interested to see if the show functions on its own, or if it's reliant on things that have come before it.
I think for the majority of these Disney Plus shows, it seems to be deeper dives and things that are very contextual, while at the same time having very minimal impact, except for this. This is this is the first Disney Plus show that doesn't end where it starts, right? I've heard this argument made before, where if you think about WandaVision, you think about
right. She's still alone. She's still grieving.
Yeah, and
at the end of WandaVision,
and then
at Falcon and Winter Soldier, Cap has handed him the shield. The next time you see him, he's going to be Captain America. So
the
it
end
makes
of
perfect
this
sense.
Madness. Just straight
All
straight
chaos. All chaos has broken loose.
So I think that Disney Plus shows, I would say, are seem to be the most dependent. But we just watched Black Widow. I'm like, anybody could watch that. Really, like there's references, but that's an A to B like spy.
Black Widow
drama.
also has no ties to anything else. It's a very contained story.
Right.
And the stinger on. Remember, we walked out of the theater, and no, I'm going to be vague here, but the stinger in Black Widow seemingly has ties to a Disney Plus show, and that also made me like, that's weird. That seems like backtracking on your promise, Kevin Feige, to make it so like people didn't have to subscribe to Disney Plus. But and then we'll talk about the finale of this show, but this is doing the converse thing, which is seemingly affecting the greater MCU in this way. We're like, is this required viewing now? I'm not quite sure. So we'll see how things pan out moving forward with the movies.
I trust they've every step of the way they seem to.
Oh, I trust everything they do as well.
I know, knowing that like my fiance did not watch all of Infinity War, has seen maybe a handful of random ass Marvel movies. Like enjoyed watching Endgame, which is the biggest praise you can give to a part 2 of ending a 24 or whatever movie thing. So I have nothing but complete faith that they literally, to explain this, they need 3 minutes with Doctor Strange, and we understand where we're at. So I'm not concerned whatsoever.
Yep.
But yeah, we're blabbering on. I know the listeners want us to get to our actual opinions with the spoilers, because there's a lot of juicy deets to get into. So let's head into this. Will be your warning. Spoilers starting now. So before,
okay.
Oh.
I'll let you say.
No,
we weren't able to say this in our non-spoiler discussion. Jonathan Majors, someone we did not put on the cast list because we didn't want to spoil anything, is fucking fantastic in the final episode. Okay, from there, Christian, you can say whatever you want.
Let's stick to this. Let's go on this train, because we're starting with favorite moments, and then we'll go into kind of some of the themes and stuff. But let's start with this, because I want to say metatextually to what's happening. You have one of the best villains in the MCU, his standalone show, and it feels like a literal, hey, you thought I was good. Here you go, Mr. Majors. You may have the stick of power to take over as one of the more interesting with all your fucking...
Take all of my chaotic energy, and I'm passing you the baton.
It's a scene I immediately wanted to watch again. I can't wait to just rewatch everything with him. It's so great. It feels a little like, at first you're like, what's it has that beautiful thing of like, really, this is it? And then you're like, oh, there's so much more happening. And I mean, we really got to keep this thing tight, but just from that, the way that it's written and the performance alone, I mean, like, let's be honest, that dude's been through this before. This has happened already. Like, all the things that you like, and that's why I love it, is because after it finished, I immediately was like, I need to like try to wrap my head around the concepts of what's happening. I love all that shit. It's so good, because not only are we going to get more of him, but we're going to get the versions of him. We're going to get the Conqueror version. We're probably going to get this version in some iteration. It almost seems like, from all the symbology that's happening, that this is a cycle that is continuing, because he seemed to be like, it's going to end up back here anyway. Let's be real. I'm going to have to save this again. It's going to come down to me. You guys are going to break through. You're going to kill me, and we're just going to be back here again. I'll see you later. I love all that shit.
Yeah.
I love it so much.
Well, we 100% know that we are definitely going to see him in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, because Kevin Feige, he's already revealed that Kang the Conqueror is the main villain for that movie. So we will be seeing a variant of Jonathan Majors in that movie. And Brian and I were talking a little bit before we started recording. Based on this performance as He Who Remains / like Immortus from the comic books, and how he brings this like Willy Wonka chaotic energy to the character, I'm so excited to see and how he differentiates between this person and Kang the Conqueror. I think we're going to get to see how much range Jonathan Majors actually has going forward here in the MCU. And I'm just so excited for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he definitely did a great job. I think it's very much an exposition dump, like we talked about, but he's bringing this energy. It's like you see this character and you absolutely believe that he has been alone with Miss Minutes in this thing for aeons. Like there's
She
no
still
doubt.
calls me that.
Yeah. Such a good bit.
Creepy.
No, and he's kind of like losing it. Like he clearly
no,
says,
definitely.
like, to be honest, it's too much to really keep track of, and this is actually a lot of responsibility, and please kill me. Like, please.
He was just a scientist. You know, at the beginning of his journey, he was just a scientist in the year or in the 31st century. So imagine going from like average citizen scientist discovering that the multiverse exists to like pseudo god being responsible for keeping all of time in track or like going forward. That's fucking crazy. I would lose my mind too.
And just breaking down, we get the line earlier from Mobius about, when the ends justify the means, you'll do pretty much anything. And it's played out to its extreme with Kang, or He Who Remains, finding Eliath and, basically finding a way to dispose of the universal trash to maintain this timeline. So we really get the full circle of functionally how this whole system that he's created plays out. I think what's really interesting is, did Doctor Strange work with him in some way to realize what needed to happen to maintain the timeline leading up to Endgame? I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of how much he knew and how much he knows at this point in terms of maintaining the timeline, the TVA, and all of this. So I'm interested to see how complicit Doctor Strange is in the TVA's crimes.
Yeah, because if we simplify it the way they've explained it in the show, which means like the way He Who Remains has dictated the flow of time, is that everything we've seen thus far in the MCU was meant to happen. Even the time travel stuff in Endgame was meant to happen. What Tony did, and even the conversations he had with Doctor Strange in determining what needed to be done to defeat Thanos in Endgame was destined to happen. So yeah, I mean that it gets kind of crazy and mind-bending when you start to talk about how Doctor Strange is implicated in the decisions that He Who Remains has made, if he is at all, or if it's just He Who Remains making the call by himself. We're in a weird place. That's why I'm saying, like, is this, have we crossed the threshold for general audiences to be like, I don't know what's going on, and truth be told, I really just don't care anymore. This is too comic booky for me. Like, I'm getting off the train, so
no,
I'm
because
interested.
they have the IP play. They're like, we're releasing Spider-Man, and you're gonna get to see all your favorite Spider-Man.
Dude, this is gonna impact Spider-Man No Way Home so much.
And I'm literally like, dude, this is literally self-explained with just an exposition dump from Doctor Strange. And what's cool is, I think the movies, if I was to make a prediction, which I'm not very good at, so please, listeners, don't like take too much stock in this. I'm very bad at this. I imagine we will get in Doctor Strange No Way Home the inciting incident of all of this. They will explain what's happening, and we'll be like, oh, this is related to this kind of thing, and
sure,
it's not needed. It's just at this point it'll be supplemental. It feels very big, and it does have implications, but it feels like something that will be explained in every movie.
No Way Home comes out in December, and I'm sure Doctor Strange will explain to Peter what's going on, and thus explain to the audience what's going on. So I completely agree with you.
So just to tie into kind of the whole what was explained in the 6th episode, we didn't get the Marvel fanfare. We got this time voices from all of our different leads throughout time, and it was really cool how that tied in with showing how the circular multiverse that He Who Remains is maintaining, going and seeing and hearing things. We almost come out of a black hole and go back into another one. The visuals were very reminiscent of the Doctor Strange stuff that was happening, and we go in and it's with just a couple of things shows us, oh, this is the Endgame universe timeline that we're in now. And it does it in such a way that, to your point about the Matrix, Christian, very much reminded me of the way they go into the analog elements of the Matrix and stuff like that. So thematically, just expressing to us visually what's happening there, I thought that was all really excellently done.
Yeah, I think that it's so hard to conceptualize these things, and this is what visual media like graphic novel, comic books, and film and TV can do so well, and this executes well. Again, a shout out to the set designers, because there's so much tasty, delicious things that are happening in that final scene. If you just take and smell the roses, it's just like perfectly crafted for this. It's such an outlandish thing, but I think communicates so much subconsciously of this like broken down citadel that's literally sitting at the edge of time. It's so crazy, and this is the kind of shit that you can only do with wizards and, you know, superheroes and stuff. So this is this is the exact wheelhouse this kind of genre was meant for, and that's why I dig it so much, because it's like, yes, you're tapping into these giant philosophical ideas that you can only really portray to mass audiences with, you know, comic books and this type of storytelling. So yes, sign me up. Yes, this is why I like any of this stuff, is just to have really cool, deep conversations about true will and fatalism and stuff. Or excuse me, true fate and all that stuff. True fate? That's not a thing. True destiny.
Determinism and fatalism?
Sure, that's great. You were the philosophy major. You save us. But we've gone down a rabbit hole on what the implications are, and Kang and all that stuff, who is not named Kang, by the way, which is very interesting.
He who remains.
Who remains, because they're probably going to be distinguished different characters that they want to kind of align with to help us keep track of who's who from what timeline. Just like Sylvie and Loki. But let's go one by one and just go through some of our favorite moments throughout the entire series. Chris, I'd like to start with you.
Man, I don't know. I'm going to narrow it down to a couple things here. My first favorite moment in the series, and I talked about a little bit when we had our discussions about episode 1 and 2 during our quick hits in our weekly upload. But I really like episode 1. A lot of things that happen in episode 1. You know, the conversations between Loki and Mobius, the scene at the very end of episode 1 when Loki is watching his the reel of his life, basically. Sorry. The reel of his life play out from the Avengers, his defeat in 2012 with the Avengers, all the way up to Thanos killing him. And a lot of the complaints that people had about the show is they feel like his emotional and arc wasn't as strong as the emotional arc that we got in the sacred timeline of the MCU. But I disagree with that. I feel like this Loki has had to process a lot of information in a short period of time, and I don't think him coming to that conclusion faster in any way denigrates the quality of that character arc, you know? Because if you were presented with your death prior to living the moment, that's life-changing, you know? And I think someone experiencing that would actually have a substantial shift in the way that they look at the world. So I do really like that moment in the first episode.
But in real quick, Chris, just to support your opinion, Loki still has a scheming mind. Like, he doesn't just abandon and go right where he's at. I think he's still trying to manipulate the game and still trying to do his tricks. He's still very much that. He just, I think in the back of his head, he has this perspective. So I think it's played very smart. I thought maybe from that first episode they were just going to expedite his character development and be like, okay, now he's the Loki you know from the end of Endgame, and that's
work done.
No, and that is not exactly. I think he's still very much that person, just with this view, and he's struggling with that. And I love it because it just implants that perspective into him, and he's having to fight with that throughout the entire series.
Right. And that kind of leads me to another one of my favorite moments, and that is in episode 5 when he encounters all of his variants in the void, and he realizes like how trapped they are as people, because all of these other variants are telling him, someone who's already experienced all these things with the TVA, and he's questioning whether like fate is real or if there is such a thing as free will. And they're saying to him, like, every time we've tried to make ourselves better, that's when we've been arrested by the TVA, or that's when we've been pruned. You know, like classic Loki, or the older Loki, managed to avoid the TVA, didn't die at Thanos' hand, but managed to avoid the TVA by putting himself into exile for centuries. And then finally, when he realizes that he's lonely and wants to reconnect with his loved ones, that's when the TVA picks him up. Because as that classic Loki puts it, they're the gods of outcasts. And it's just this journey that I love, this journey that Loki's on, trying to figure out, like, does he have to be that, or can he be something more than just an individual who's here on this earth to prop up others? You know, his defeat is meant to raise others up, which is a point that's made in episode 1. I just really dig that. No other Marvel content has delved this deep into character development like this. And that's what I think, and I'm sure that's why Christian likes this show so much. But like, that's one reason that I really like this show so much as well.
And in
it's really good.
In that same episode, I'm going to call out, just because you're on the topic, one of my favorite moments, which is you get all the Lokis kind of converging. He meets like a few Lokis and a crocodile Loki, which is, yes, give me crocodile Loki.
Alligator Loki.
Alligator Loki. I should know the difference. I'm from Florida. You get all these different. You get a small band of Lokis, and then this giant group, one of which is also played by Tom Hiddleston, and it's a big gang of them. And there's kind of a power struggle with all the Lokis because they're quote unquote like survivors, you know.
They just betray.
They all turn on each other.
That is like Tarantino, Guy Ritchie-esque, like levels of just deep complexity.
Loki's just watching like, oh God, I'm the worst.
He has to see himself of like how he could never fit into a society because they're just
he can't
like
help himself.
So many betrayals and backstabbings, and that's why it's like, again, I'm gonna keep repeating myself, but it's the kind of character development that you can only justify and really flesh out in such a silly premise, right? And it just works so well. And I was actually on an airplane when I watched this, and that maybe that affects how much I like the series. By the way, I watched 2 full episodes on an airplane. And I think
on airplanes,
when you're high in the sky, you're high on life.
Yeah,
that's the saying, I think.
What and to add to that scene, and we're probably gonna. This might be a longer episode, but to add to that scene, I love the fact that the 2 Lokis that step away with our main Loki variant, the one that we kind of know from 2012, are 2 Lokis that have experienced things outside of the norm, you know, who have grown a little bit outside of what your average Loki is supposed to be. And that is, you know, classic Loki, who's lived a long time. Also, Richard E. Grant, we haven't even mentioned how great his short performance is in the show. And then Kid Loki, who seems to be the most aggressive of all the Lokis and has actually managed to kill Thor. So, and Alligator Loki, I'm not going to count him, but we have these 2 other human sentient Lokis who seem to break a little bit out of the mold. So they can see the flaws in these other Lokis that are just about chaos and mischief and deception, basically. And I really dig that.
And it kind of plays into, again, one of the things that's in the back of your head while watching this. And again, I think this plays into like how much you love, how much you invest in MCU characters as a whole. Is like the whole time, even like Alligator Loki, like that's just like kind of a throwaway, not even a throwaway joke. It's a very repetitive joke throughout, and it works. It makes me laugh. But also because it's Loki, not only in that scene, it's just a funny example of it. But the whole time you're like, that alligator Loki's smarter than he looks, and it's going to transform and be a very cunning, smart Loki, and there's some sort of scheme that's happening. And it's crazy, and I can see why it's actually maybe a downside for some people, is like there is this inherent tension in this character being so many of this character. And that's why it's a great goof, that big backstabbing thing we had mentioned, but also just in like characters like that, or in what you think the plot of each episode is, where people were speculating, and I know I was a part of it too, of like, next episode are we going to learn that this was a con from one of these Loki, and it makes it so.
When is the betrayal going to take place? Right. Is like everyone's question.
Yeah, and they didn't. The writers were super smart to like, there is a betrayal at the end, like it does happen. There's a Loki betrayal, like that is part of the story. It's just kind of misdirected, and it's not kind of, what probably you'd imagine, but I think it works so well, and I think the show throughout.
What a great line, in the season finale between Sylvie and Loki when they're out trying to figure out whether or not they're going to kill He Who Remains. When he says like, we're not on the same page here because you can't trust and I can't be trusted. And that just like, it falls back into this idea that maybe we can escape who we are, maybe there is no such thing as free will. And I love that the show really, in my personal opinion, the show doesn't really give a definitive answer either way, but it's just tragic. You know,
And it
Loki's
defines
a tragic character.
It still manages to define and justify and explain Loki's character throughout all the other movies we've seen, which is this internal struggle of like he doesn't even trust himself at the end of the day, and
Right.
and it's that's what kind of like eggs him on to do the things he does, is because he is like a lack of self-confidence and faith in himself to do something, and then he puts that on other people, and that's why I think it's a great character study, because it almost like tells you so much about that person by his ability to interact with other versions of himself. It's very cool.
So Christian and I have talked a lot. Brian, what were some of your favorite moments?
Brian,
in the
before you
series?
start, let me just focus on myself and my own thoughts. No, Brian, please.
No, you guys have talked about Chris. The first one you brought up, I was definitely going to bring up too. Loki looking back on his life and his conversations with Mobius there definitely sets the tone for the introspective kind of philosophical elements of the show that plays out throughout the rest of it for sure. I don't know. Are we talking about favorite episodes right now? Is that going to be a separate segment?
Favorite
or-
episodes, favorite scenes, whatever you want.
Okay, because episode 5 was my favorite episode personally, and you were just talking about it, Chris. But yeah, I think it so perfectly encapsulates what a Loki show can be. There's huge implications for the multiverse. It shows us functionally what it means to have access to all of these characters in a way that completely lines up with what the rest of the show's been doing. If you think about it, there's probably a bunch of Kangs in this void as well that are trying to conquer it. I don't know, but
I mean, He Who Remains said that, you know, during the multiversal war, Kangs were pruned, you know, so like Alioth definitely consumed some Kang variants.
Right, for sure. So I think it does such a great job of not only expanding the lore, explaining where the MCU can go, but also showing, expanding Loki's power set and doing it through his relationship with Sylvie. We haven't talked too much about the relationship between them, but that is probably my favorite element of the show. We get the hand holding in the previous episode, the whole Lamentis bit. I think this is probably part of the show that you could argue maybe doesn't have a lot of forward momentum in terms of where we get, but I love all of the world of Lamentis, the Blade Runner aesthetic, and just the development of their relationship, how it goes, building up to this adorable cuddle up moment with the blanket. She's asking if it's a tablecloth, the thing that's, you know, it's just, they're so perfectly adorable together, and they both don't know how to really show affection well, but it's working for me. And someone like Loki, who's been through so much throughout the course of the MCU, he's obviously not settling down here, but just the fact that he can find this sort of relationship, it's really beautiful, and it was really touching for me.
And just to piggyback off of what you're saying, Brian, I agree with you that it's a very sweet and very beautiful type of relationship. And Christian and I were talking about this a little off air. How ironic is that the only person Loki has ever been able to truly love is himself.
Of course. Yes.
So there is this weird underlying
narcissism,
truth.
Yeah.
The narcissism or truth when you're watching the two of them interact, in that they're really just resonating with themselves.
Yeah.
You know, it's very indulgent, self-indulgent.
But as she clearly says at the end, she goes, "I'm not you." You know, she has like diverged. She's like, "I'm a different person," which is really great little revelation that happens at the end of, I think, some meaningful action between two characters.
No, that's a fair point. And kind of
before you get into that, I just want to double down on the world that you said. It's how cool it is.
Lamentis.
No, it's not Lamentis. Lamentis is episode 3. You're
talking about the Citadel.
No, the Citadel. No. The place with the Goliath is called something else. It's
the Void.
It's the Void. Because that's what you were referring to as a cool place, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Well, I was talking about the Void earlier, because episode 5 is my favorite, but I was referring to Lamentis as well.
Yeah, I think they're both cool staging grounds, although I prefer the bureaucratic TVA as far as aesthetic thing, because it's less, I don't know, it's less dependent on the CGI stuff. But they're still both cool things. They literally go to, they're in the bureaucratic TVA, and then they go to Lamentis, which is the end of another world. That's so cool. And then the Void is like basically all the TVA's trash. It's like all the timelines garbage, and there's so many Easter eggs throughout.
Mad Max Wasteland.
Mad Max
Wasteland. The Easter eggs.
of of timeline garbage is essentially what it is. It's so cool. It is interesting that like Loki just runs into himself, and it's like, and then his two friends that he made along the way. It's kind of very
So thematically, though, I know we're kind of all over the place here. I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of, okay, there's this whole idea of free will. Can we escape our fate? Are we inherently locked into who we are? Do we ultimately have one purpose that we can't fall out of? So Loki is able to go through and see so much, not only in his own experience, but seeing all of these different Lokis, seeing how often and how differently things could have gone outside of his own perspective, seeing the disparity in them, and seeing classic Loki, who is ridiculously jaded about the whole experience, about life itself, who, after talking to Mobius to some degree, comes to terms with the fact that he can save the day and he's willing to sacrifice himself.
And that's a great moment too, when he's just like, it's never too late to change.
And he takes it to heart, and it shows. We get to see both Sylvie and Loki say, how is he doing that? And Loki's like, I think we're more powerful than we realize. And I just love that for the future of what Loki could do in his power potential. And I think it shows that Loki is very aware of what the multiverse means for other versions of himself because of what he went through in that limited episode. Sylvie comes in a little later. And I think it sets up their ultimate disagreement well when He Who Remains is making this argument like, look, there's a bunch of other different versions that will screw shit up if they're around. And Loki, who's just seen this exact situation with all of his other variants, he's like, okay, this is a believable scenario for me, even if this guy is the mad tyrant that he ultimately is, who is using the ends to justify a lot of means. I think it really works and leads up to, like you said, Christian, that final conflict, that final pseudo betrayal, even though that we finally got the kiss as well, which, my God, the tension, it was just building for so long. And then she kicks him through a portal, of course.
As a Loki is ought to do.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, that betrayal was inevitable.
So yeah, that episode 5, definitely one of my favorites. One of the most, before we knew what pruning meant, seeing Mobius get pruned, that was tough for me.
Oh,
that was
it was
a rough
awful.
moment. I was like, oh, Mobius. Thank God they relatively quickly rewrote that or recontextualized that. But
why do I want a jet ski so much? Huh? Answer me. So sad.
Dude, my wife was crying when Loki got pruned. And I just had to be like,
just about to say that he loves her.
Give it a couple of seconds. Like, thankfully, the tears didn't last long. I think I was talking to Christian about how interesting would it have been if we didn't get that stinger at the end of episode 4 and they made us wait a week thinking that our main character was dead. But I don't think Marvel would do that.
They've done it before with Loki.
I also don't think it, like, if you think about it in the it's hard to think about this. I've been thinking about this a lot with like even just self-indulgent plug for my music, but it's like you're releasing all the music at once or releasing the whole thing. And I think the same thing is true. Like when you think about the art form, it's like, well, how many percentage of people are just going to watch back to back anyway? And so there isn't that thing.
True. There might be people that wait until all the episodes have aired and then they binge it.
So it's more, they were like, it's a more consistent experience just to be like, hey, don't worry, Tom Hiddleston's still in it. Don't be sad for a week. We're not going to do that to you. Because then you run the risk of it feeling even cheaper. Because like,
they already made us cry for a year.
Yeah, Loki's died like 6
Infinity
times.
War and Endgame. So
yeah, Loki's died a lot. So
yeah.
Brian, any other favorite moments you want to mention?
You know, I think with the ones you guys have brought up, I think that's the main stuff. Yeah, in terms of favorite moments.
Real quickly, in addition to the ones I've already mentioned, I just love the scenes between the conversations between Mobius and Loki. I that's what made me fall in love with the series. I was like, oh, finally we're talking about real shit in an MCU thing.
I wish we got more of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's honestly, I think that any more might have been a little just like too self-indulgent to my my artistic needs as a human to be like, talk about real stuff, okay, MCU. Don't feed me this candy too long. I want a steak and then I want my De Arno candy liqueur, okay? And that's a really specific reference for alcoholics, it's specifically alcoholic Italians. So I I love the balance of it. I think it actually does work. And those conversations are they just make the world. So many fun things. I love the time loop cage that even Loki's put in, where he's having to talk with what's her name?
With Lady Sif.
Lady Sif. He's having to relive that moment over and over again, and he like beats him down into so good.
And we get like a genuine moment, like a genuine expression of guilt and remorse about it.
He's
right?
apologetic.
That is a good shout, Christian. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I think it's and it's like a trope that happened, and I was like not sold on it. I was like, oh, this is kind of like a little lame. Like he's stuck in a time loop. It's like his little version of hell. But then when we get that moment, like you said, Brian, just totally redeems it, makes it more than the sum of its parts. And yeah, I'm here for it. Yeah, there's a point. I love the kind of fake oneer. We get like a little cheated oneer, but it still works really well.
Momentous, yeah.
And that's like that's an action scene that ends in kind of tragedy, and that's kind of like that plays into kind of my final point when we're talking about favorite moments, which is why I think that even if I didn't know there was a season 2, I wouldn't be that upset, with the exception of Gugu Mbatha-Raw's character, right? That's the one we get the least amount of, right? That's the one that deserves the most. But besides that,
see, you guys say that, but I mean, we do. It is. I do agree that there could have been more done there. But what I think works for her character is I think we do see her through things like her looking at the stain that Mobius leaves. She has regret for what she's done, and she's been drinking the Kool-Aid for so long that she is almost, if this will, she's not willing to have her worldview rocked in such a way because of how long she's been doing this, and us seeing her as a teacher. I appreciated that too, which gives us some insight into, we don't know if she knows where she comes from, and if she was able to see that, would she have a change of heart? So I do agree that it was a bit underwritten maybe, but I think her relationship with Owen Wilson, even though that was a betrayal of sorts, I appreciate it. I think she sold it for me, at least, even though there could have been more.
Yeah. I'm really wondering what her involvement is with Kang. And what files she was given by Miss Minutes.
See, I think she genuinely is out of the loop. I think she's been lied to.
But now she is. I think she's more in the loop now.
Right,
yes,
she's trying.
So when at the last thing she says is, "I'm going to go search for free will," and then goes through the portal. And in the comic books, I mentioned this before I'm pretty sure to both of you outside of recordings. She is Kang the Conqueror's love interest. So I definitely think that in season 2, we are going to see her engage with Kang.
Maybe in more
especially
ways than
considering right, and especially considering that Loki sees that Kang statue in the final shot of the show.
The moment when she says,
"Kang, are we going to get
of,
Kang the Bang?"
Oh my god!
Yikes!
Yeah. Well, man, where's that harmonica?
But
you're saying, Brian?
I may have lost it.
There it is.
Did you get it?
But she says something like, only the person in charge has free will, is able to have free will or something. So she's clearly maybe more in the loop than she's let on prior to that moment when she says something like that.
She doesn't seem particularly super bummed or shocked that the timekeepers are robots.
I know.
That's true.
That would be my like red flag. But to my original point, besides that being maybe a loose end you could complain, but I like your points, Brian. No, that's totally fine. Is that Loki is, at the end of the day, every great villain is actually just a tragic character, right? That's like a hallmark of literature. And I think this show really reiterates that. And I think that's why it ends in a place that I think is a good place for Loki, which is he just has such he finally finds love, as narcissistic as it may be. He's betrayed by himself / his love interest. And he's kicked back into where he has some friends that he has made along the way who have no idea who the fuck he is because of all the weird time shit.
Completely alienated.
So rough.
It is, the man has all the books. His glasses are broken. He's found himself. He's found his glorious purpose, which is like his inner self and the ability to be selfless and trust himself and to trust others. And it's been stripped away. it's just that's poetry right there, and I love seeing that in fucking MCU shit. It's great. It's awesome.
Agreed.
So
And then
this,
Feige laid the groundwork, and we just walked on it.
I'm telling you,
Paved the road. He paved the road, and we
Paved the
walked down
road.
it.
and I'm telling you that it is like, I don't imagine them going this way, but like they did pave the way for Loki to then be like, well then, f this, like, you know, to make a turn and be like even more of a villain. He definitely can go that way. I don't know if that's the way they're gonna go, but it definitely is at the point where he has that option.
In the trailers for the show, we did get some scenes that we did not get to see in the season finale, and those were scenes of Loki in like full Asgardian armor sitting on the throne of Asgard. So I don't know if those scenes were maybe cut when Miss Minutes is like tempting Loki at the beginning of the season finale with like, I can have you defeat the Avengers, and I can give you the throne of Asgard, and I can give you the Infinity Gauntlet, like whatever you want. You know, maybe they cut that scene.
Or it was literally shot just to misdirect.
Could have been, you know, that wouldn't be the first time that Marvel has done something like that.
Yeah. I can see a lot of points in which that footage would have been useful. Like if they want to do it, like here's all the different versions of yourself, whatever.
Right.
Who knows? All right. You know, we were going to have a big conversation about fate and determinism, but I'm going to make the determination and say you have no free will in this matter, and we're going to skip that because that's a whole other... I think we've mentioned it enough in our favorite moments and why this show's working. But let's answer this last question. Now that we've gotten these 3 Disney Plus MCU shows, what does this mean for theatrical storytelling? Which method do we prefer? What does it all mean, Basil? Chris, this was something that you wanted to bring up. You and Brian were talking about. Let's start with you. What are your thoughts here?
So the reason I wanted to bring this up is mostly because with WandaVision and with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and even with Loki leading up to the finale before we knew what was actually going to happen, there's been a lot of speculation and a lot of anticipation and a lot of built up expectation about what happens in these season finales, who the main villains are. You know, with WandaVision, it was Mephisto. People thought Mephisto was going to be the main villain of that show when it turned out just to be Agatha all along, right? With Falcon and the Winter Soldier, there's a big build up to like, who is the power broker? And it turned out just to be Sharon Carter. I'm spoiling both of these shows, by the way. Sorry.
Heavy
We're in
spoils.
spoilers. We're in spoilers now. And then, of course, leading up to the finale of Loki, everybody was speculating that the main villain, the man behind the curtain, in terms of the Wizard of Oz, it was going to be Kang. And out of all 3 shows, the only one that actually delivered on fan theorizing was Loki. And what that led to was a lot of people being upset or disappointed or not enjoying those other 2 shows. So the question I was asking both of you while we were watching these is this a good way to deliver content to people? You know, because I personally think that these last 3 projects, WandaVision, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Loki, have been the most, divisive projects that the MCU has released. Typically with the movies, I don't think there's a lot of division or polarization in people's opinion for the most part. The MCU fan base as a whole isn't really that toxic from what I've encountered, like say Star Wars is, you know? But I think these last 3 projects, because of their delivery method, have led to a hype and an anticipation, like I said, an expectation that has soured a lot of people to what these projects are actually delivering. Whereas when it comes to the anticipation for the movies, we're delivered the whole project in one fell swoop, right? Instant gratification. We're given the whole story. So yes, while we can theorize and anticipate what's going to happen in these movies for, a year and a half, we know exactly what the product is as soon as we walk out of that movie theater. With these shows, we have to wait 2 months to get the whole picture. And I think that has led to more people being disappointed with what these shows have delivered. What do you guys think about that?
Well, this is a weird thing as a podcaster of a very popular podcast, obviously. Because there's a whole industry around it. We're a part of it. We're literally
Right.
taking advantage of the cottage industry. Now, we've waited to see the whole picture, and I do prefer that because I don't. Chris Stuckman, I was watching his review of The Hunt to get some perspective. I know I'm diverging here. I'll be quick. But I recently watched The Hunt. I recommend seeing it, but it was a divisive movie that's critically split. I think it's really great. But I watched his review, and he had mentioned that when Chris Stuckman is a very famous YouTuber, almost as famous as us.
Almost.
And
He'll
early
get
in his
there, maybe.
How many millions of subscribers does he have on YouTube?
early in his career, he reviewed trailers. And he was mentioning in his review of The Hunt that he used to review trailers. And he mentioned why he stopped doing it is because he didn't watch the fucking movie. He was reviewing the promotional material for the movie, but was starting all these conversations around what the movie may be and what I'd want to see from this movie and all this other stuff, and not actually on the art form itself. And I think it plays into the way must-see TV and all these things go. We're part of this cottage industry, although I'd say we stray away from a lot of that stuff. I know our friend over at James Barnes over at See First Villains does the weekly recaps and does a lot of speculation, but I think James is a really great example of just having really healthy, nerdy conversations. I think there is that healthy enjoyment of what the source material is and what this material is and what it could be. But I think what we've seen from, even Star Wars fans, where there is, because the MCU, I think, just, number one, their execution has just been more consistent than the Star Wars series as a whole. And just at a more, Kevin Feige is the reason this has just a consistent direction, which I think makes it land. But
Of course.
for Star Wars, it's the same thing where it's like, this is a trilogy. And part of the reason why I think they may be like going away from trilogies, or if they have one, make sure it's a consistent idea throughout, is that, you take this risk when you release stuff weekly. It adds to this cottage industry that we are sort of a part of and definitely adjacent to, of talking about what we think is going to happen on the next one and what would be really cool. And obviously there's source material to go off of. But I think at the end of the day, that's not really Disney's fault as long as the content's good. Like, it doesn't.
I agree.
It doesn't matter, and you can't make everyone happy all the time. And it's a hard thing to balance. And I love the week to week of these type of shows. I love catching up with all of you. I know I text the chat because Loki I was pretty good on. I would text it like the day after. I'd be like, I just saw Loki with an emoji of whatever my reaction was, and it's so fun to talk about these things. And like, I enjoy it. I'll take it. There is always the downside of fan anticipation and doing that. Whereas like, to your point, Chris, can you imagine if Endgame was like a TV series?
Oh my God.
And we had just seen the first episode of that. People would be like, they already nixed Thanos. What do you think's gonna happen? I think Kang is actually gonna be the bad guy, and it's just Thanos again. People will be like, that's bad storytelling. But
during the year of speculation, people did actually think Kang was going to show up in Endgame because of the time travel elements.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and I'm sure there's definitely a subset of people that were disappointed in Endgame. They're probably not large. It's probably not there's enough good stuff happening there that I think it pleases most people. But there are people upset. And I think the problem is with like Twitter, and this can go to a political discussion that we will avoid entirely, as much as I want you to fight in the comments politically about everything. In those comments, get at us. Tell us what you think about abortion. I don't know.
Why?
But
why do you do this to us?
Down in the comments. As much as like it's the like part of the thing is that the entire internet look at me culture is just circulated around what is an outrageous thing, and we are the show that is hot takes higher than pancakes. But I think we do a responsible job of having perspective and having a difference of opinions and stuff. It's an industry of outrage. What can you say? And so, fuck it, just make the shows. I like this. Do more of this. I think comic books are long form storytelling, and TV is long form storytelling, and I think it fits really well.
I think what people need to remember, and one of the reasons why I was asking this question is that we have to take media, and I struggle with this as well, but we have to take media at face value. We have to take it for what it is, not what we want it to be. And that's harder with these television shows that, especially when these television shows aren't like 20 episodes long, I think, when they're only like really 6 hours in length. It's harder to do that, especially in the comic book community, when these shows have shown that they're diving deeper into the comic book lore than some of the movies have, because they get to spend more time in that space. They're longer products. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, we have to take the products for what they are,
Brian,
and not what we wanted them to be. Brian, what are your thoughts?
No, I think I'm pretty much in agreement with you guys. Christian, I think you said it best. It's like comics are long form storytelling. The fact that we can get pseudo standalone episodes that are still moving the plot forward, expanding the lore of the universe, and moving our characters along emotionally. I'm going to continue watching these if we can meet that bar. What I really enjoy about things like C4S villains and shows like that, as someone who's not as familiar with the canon and the established comics, people speculating will bring up comics that I've never read that I can go off and become interested in because of this, and kind of see what they're being inspired by. Random characters who are just kind of throw off, like Frog Thor that you pointed out to me, Chris. It's like, okay, like maybe I want to go find a Frog Thor comic. It's like Throg. I didn't even know this character existed. So yeah, I think, and to the business side of it, it makes perfect sense that good or bad, as long as people are watching the show and talking about it, this is what Disney's looking for. And
it's a perfect business model.
Yeah,
especially like Christian was saying, we're like a part of or adjacent to this group of content creators that talk about this stuff. Like, we're free marketing for Disney overall. So this is a genius business model for them.
If anything, we're paying to market.
Yeah, right.
It's a $400 mic.
So you're telling me it's all a manipulation?
It's all a minute. Yes.
Yes.
Your mind would go there. That's one of my favorite lines.
It's great.
I got to rewatch that scene after we're done recording. I just need to go back and rewatch the scene. It's so good. Okay, so we're running long. We've hit over the hour mark. Our listeners are either bored or fighting about the right to choose down below. One of the two. That baby don't have free will.
No. Why are you doing this?
Yikes.
That's just that Pop-O-Holics spin, that special spin. Disney loves our free advertisement. Yeah, not enough abortion talk in Loki. That's really my final thoughts. But do you gentlemen have any final thoughts in Disney Plus's Loki season 1?
If you haven't seen Loki, how have you gotten this far into the Pop-O-Holics episode? But if you have, I highly recommend you watching it. And just the inner comic book nerd in me is so excited for what the show has done to the MCU. We get a visual representation of the timeline branching at the very end of the finale. And like, this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe multiverse come to fruition. And I just cannot wait to see what implications lie ahead of us.
Yeah, I love seeing that the visual timeline branch, that like light, and I'm just seeing all the different TV shows. And there's a TV show, and there's a movie, and there's another TV show, and there's a comic book.
In terms, there's a branch that's the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man branch out there, and there's an Andrew Garfield Spider-Man branch over there.
Oh, that's a dark light.
Yes. Nobody likes that branch.
Yeah, prune that branch. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, we need to prune that branch right away.
You got Mobius looking up, being like, "Oh, he doesn't want that branch. It's got a weird electro.
Clip that one.
It's got a weird electro song that we don't like." Brian, any final thoughts?
I think this show's great. What I'm kind of interested to see how do you guys think this could serve as, for someone coming into the MCU new? Is this show enough to hop in and go? I was interested to see, like, if you watch the first 4 movies leading up to Avengers, hop in here. How much will you understand of what's happened previously?
I mean, technically, the move, like, technically, it's self-contained within just up to Avengers 1.
Right.
And
Loki doesn't escape in that version of the Avengers, but I think the show does I mean, it's so hard for us to say, like we said at the top of the episode.
It's probably impossible.
But
yeah,
I think the show, at least in episode 1, does a decent job of explaining what's going on, and it does show Loki. I mean, in that first episode, Loki could almost be an audience surrogate like learning what the TVA means along with the audience, and he is in that
Yeah.
episode. So
No, I
I
definitely
mean, I think it's possible. Will there be some things where you're like, I have no idea what they're talking about? Yeah, definitely. But
I had mentioned that more
I think it'd be
casual
possible.
watchers of these shows did say that it was slow for them. So it's not for everybody, but it's definitely for me.
No, yeah, I'm in the same boat. I loved this show,
Me too.
and thematically, it's some of the most high level concepts, which makes sense given this is about the structure of reality in this universe. But yeah, I don't know if we've said again how hilarious this show is, but it's consistently got great jokes, which is classic Marvel stuff. But yeah, a really funny watch as well as being emotional.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it again. It's my favorite Disney Plus thing. Streaming video content, TV format, long form stuff, and also probably my favorite thing I've seen since Endgame, which is really nice, and gives me a lot of hope for other stuff that they can do this, and they don't have to do this for everything. Like have a Black Widow. Listen, make your Nintendo Switch OLED model for whoever that's for. Marvel's a great thing because it has a lot for everyone. I know it's cliche. That's what they're trying to do with Star Wars. Like everything Star Wars is trying to do is like, we'll be more like Marvel, we promise. But I think Marvel is that perfect thing of like, you're gonna find something to like, and this happens to be like my wheelhouse. So I will take full like love and be like, yeah, this is my jam. And
Christian, I do have to say it surprises me and delights me that you were such a huge fan of this show, especially considering that like the first half of the show feels very Doctor Who like to me, and I know that when we watched Doctor Who, when we had our Doctor Who month, not all of Doctor Who resonated with you. Some of it did, but not all of it did. So it's a delight to me that you,
Chris,
that you
I think you're
enjoyed
wrong because the first 2 episodes are really good of this show.
Ooh.
Shade tossed at Doctor Who. Okay.
This show's better than Doctor Who. I loved. I saw the highs of Doctor Who. It's very good. The statues. That's a great app. Everybody should watch that. If you want to know more about Doctor Who, like if you're a Loki fan and you're also a Doctor Who fan, we talk about Doctor Who. We have a whole month where I'm introduced to Doctor Who. We also introduced Chris to Fast and Furious, and
Yes.
spoiler alert, he loved it. Loved a lot of it. It was really fun. And you can find more of that. We've got links down below. Subscribe to the YouTube if you want more video content like this, if you want like these big wrap-ups of these shows or stuff, we're here to get your eyeballs on us and get your feedback. You can also send us feedback directly. You can directly talk to us by emailing us at popholicscast@gmail.com. We read every piece of fan email that we get. So send it along. Rate us 5 stars on your favorite podcast player of choice. We also have an audio form where you're going to get much more reviews, much more content, the full weekly uploads. That's available, again, in the link tree down below. You can subscribe on Overcast or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff. Gentlemen, where can people find more of your individual work on the interwebs?
Fellow Pop-Holics, you can find me on Twitter at Chris Conkling, talking about all things nerdy, comic books, television, movies, video games, collectibles. If it's nerdy, I am talking about it.
You can find me at True Pop-O-Holic for bad puns galore.
And you can find my band at Midnight Satire. That is on Twitter as well as on Spotify and Apple Music. Tidal. We're on Deezer. That's a French streaming service. You should check it out. And there's much more content coming soon, so follow that there, and you'll see it more. A music video was just filmed with these 2 beautiful gentlemen, so if you like the work we do, there is a crossover collab of many friends, so that's coming out soon. Looking forward to that. Chris, what are we talking about on the next main topic episode?
Christian, it's going to be a surprise to all of us because we haven't talked about it yet. So, we've kind of done like a Marvel-y thing this month. I believe I called it our mid-year Marvel mashup. Loyal listeners and viewers, if you have an idea for a piece of Marvel that you want us to cover that we haven't talked about, you email us at popholicast@gmail.com.
We're reviewing MODOK, the hit Hulu TV show.
I mean, if you want to,
Don't fit with the alliteration that Chris is going for here.
Sure, we can do that if you want. We'll see what comes next Wednesday, fellow Pop-Holics. We're as excited to find out as you are.
It's both of your jobs to figure out what we're covering. I just show up. With
We'll talk about
I just show up with my $400 microphone.
And you sound excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to. That'll do it for this episode. We look forward to what we're talking about. You're just as in the know as we are at this point. We'll see you next episode.